Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Slovakia's controversial leader Robert Fico has made his way to China. Following his very controversial visit to Moscow, he is now in high-level talks with Chinese officials, mostly pertaining to the economy. And this comes in the wake of the European initiative to impose tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Why did Robert Fico go to China? What is he trying to achieve? What impact may it have? Well, we're going to be talking about this and more with our guest today, Martin Šebeňa, Chief Economist at the Central European Institute of Asian Studies. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, good morning.
So for this conversation, we're not really going to focus on the Moscow visit. Much has been said about this. It does generate a few problems for the European Union, given that, like Viktor Orban, Robert Fico is actually going against the consensus on the war in Ukraine. But let's now actually focus on the visit to China, because this is not really as much about diplomacy as it is about economic cooperation. Why did Robert Fico choose to visit China at this stage? And what does it have to do with the entire dispute regarding electric vehicles?
Yeah, so you're correct to say that the visit has a stronger economic focus. However, you need to remember that the visit was originally scheduled to take place in June, but it was postponed due to the assassination attempt at the prime minister in May. So it was before the electric vehicles. This agenda was not the top agenda at the time this was scheduled. And it's really more political, right? The economic content has been added later, or is being added as a fig leaf. First and foremost, it's political. It wants to show that Slovakia is a friend of China, and it has its own, as they like to call, independent and autonomous foreign policy. However, obviously, in the meantime, the dispute over the tariffs on electric vehicles from China has increased. Slovakia has voted against the imposition of tariffs. The question is whether it is good or bad for the Slovak economy. You can argue both ways, right? Slovakia is dependent on exports of electric vehicles to China. It is its highest export article, and is usually the SUVs produced by Volkswagen in Bratislava. On the other hand, Slovakia could also benefit from the tariffs, because when there are tariffs, the Chinese automakers are forced to set up factories in Europe, and Slovakia is one of those places where they go. We already have a Chinese investment in electric vehicles in Slovakia. It's the Geely factory that's being built in the east of Slovakia, so that the chances are there would be more. So the tariffs are. You can argue that they could benefit or be a threat to Slovak economy. You could argue both ways depending on how you look at it, and the prime minister looks at it as a threat rather than an opportunity.
So let's look at the political context first. So you've mentioned that this is actually more important than it seems, and that this visit was planned way ahead of the entire debacle concerning electric vehicles. So you had some leaders from Central and Eastern Europe engaging with China. For example, Poland's President Andrzej Duda. However, Poland's President Andrzej Duda was really not, reinforcing the so-called peace narrative, namely that it is the European Union that doesn't want peace in Ukraine, that the European Union, in fact, is pro-war. Well, Robert Fico is doing this. He did that in Moscow. And by extension, also, he carries this message to China. Why is he doing this? Which may seem a rhetorical question, but also, what does it do to the overall image of the European Union as an actor on the geopolitical scene?
This has been his consistent message for the past 2 years. He won an electoral campaign last year on denouncing the war in Ukraine and calling for peace, and saying that he would actively reach out to the Russian side, that it's not only one-sided. So, so the visit to China is actually consistent with that, right? Also his change, or the way he calls his change in his foreign policy, like all azimuth, so like trying to reach out to any country around the world without regard for for values. So removing values from the foreign policy and just looking at it from a transactional perspective. That is something he's been preaching since he came to power a year ago, and that is something that has been a consistent narrative. So what he's doing here is definitely undermining the European unity, definitely moving closer to what the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is doing, but one needs to remember that this is what he said he would do that, and he is doing that. So in that respect, it does not come as a surprise. The Chinese side is happy about it because it fits their narrative. They are happy about European disunity on the war in Ukraine, so they welcomed him with open arms, and all top representatives of the Chinese political system have met with him during this trip.
Now, of course, it has to be put in context that Russia is the sole aggressor in this war, right? Ukraine is the victim in the war, but also any peace initiatives which are, designed and implemented above the heads of Ukrainians will be at the expense of Ukraine. So, when Fico is saying, we're reaching out to everyone, he's actually not really reaching out to the Ukrainians, who should have the agency about how they want this conflict to stop. And instead, he's engaging with the aggressor, Russia. How does the European Union, do you think, intend to respond to this, given that it is undermining European unity, what Fico is doing right now?
I'm not really sure how the European Union is responding to that, because the European Union has struggled to find a response to Viktor Orban, who's been doing it for much longer, since the war started. And
they did kind of downgrade the presidency. Some of the meetings were moved from Budapest to Brussels.
Right. Yeah, but Slovakia is not in a position of European presidency. So that's what I was coming at. Like, the tools are really limited at what the European Union can do. The European Union delayed the payment of some of the cohesion funds. I believe these were unblocked last month. So there are some tools, economic tools, that they're trying to wield against Fico, but you have a fundamental disagreement on the view of Ukraine, right? A European Union, just as you said, and I agree with that, is all in for a just peace in Ukraine, right? That we need to see who is the aggressor, who is the victim, and settle for peace. Fico is looking only for peace. He doesn't. Not so much a just peace, right? Because in his view, any peace is better than fighting, even the unjust peace, because that brings stability, that brings economic prosperity, etc. This is his logic. So that's why he's reaching across to East Asia, to China, and trying to see if they can find a way together with them to facilitate peace talks.
So now let's look at the economic side of things. It is understandable that any country wants foreign investors on its soil, but to what extent do you think investors from China, especially if they actually make very substantial contributions to economies of countries like Hungary, like Slovakia, why would this be problematic? To what extent is it linked to this, age-old debate whether capital has nationality or not?
Yeah. Foreign capital can be unproblematic and can be problematic. Slovakia has a lot of East Asian capital in terms of Korean and Japanese investment because, as you just said in the previous segment, Slovakia is heavily exposed to the automotive industry, and that has been non-problematic. We do not have much experience with Chinese capital to date, and the largest factory that I mentioned is actually built by Volvo management. So this one should be unproblematic as well. But the other ones would be coming. There is a Chinese state-owned company considering investment in Slovakia, and state-owned company, Chinese state-owned company, by definition comes with its own security risks because of the connections home, and also the potential political pressure it can exert on Slovakia through its connections to the Chinese state. So the unfair, perhaps, conditions to operate in Slovakia, etc. So these could be, especially when it's linked to the state and when it's not an investment from a private Chinese company, that could really create some security risks. Obviously, then there are questions of how the Chinese would finance that, how the Chinese would what kind of people they would employ. Would it be just their management? Would it be local management, right? Which could again create tensions in Slovakia. We currently have one tension where a major JV joint venture between a Slovak and a Chinese company are attempting to build a battery plant, and there seem to be massive environmental concerns that are not being taken into consideration very seriously by the government. Actually, the Chinese investor is more concerned about it than the Slovak government, and that creates also tensions, and then it creates a bad reputation for a Chinese investment in Slovakia overall.
So it's overall not just about investors, it's about state-subsidized and state-controlled investors, which may have their own agenda, not necessarily a purely economic one. Martin Šebeňa was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm Milan Šerevinsky. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.